Sarah Hagee. I'm with the Chicago office of HNTB, where I lead a team of planning professionals supporting our transit agencies, including PACE, Metra, and the CTA. At HNTB, we are committed to advancing the regional conversation on sustainable transportation and mobility, and we are extremely proud to and excited to sponsor today's event. How green is your commute? I think it's a great question we should all answer today, and we all would have different answers, I'm sure, depending on where we're coming from. Today's panel will be moderated by Audrey Wennick, MPC's Director of Transportation. Audrey led MPC's recently published Transit Means Business study, as well as led the Busted Commute campaign, social media campaign, to highlight the need for transportation investment in Illinois, which, as we all know, that today is May 31st. It's a very important day. I haven't been plugged in. I don't know what the news is. If you do, please share it if there's been anything. So Audrey is going to be joined by a diverse group of 4 professionals here today, each bringing their own perspective from different sectors, including business, transit agencies, and then the public-private partnership with the TMA of Lake Cook. Dorval Carter is the president of the Chicago Transportation Authority, the nation's second largest public transportation system, providing over 1.5 million rides on an average weekday. And he's joined by John Antonucci from the MIT Transit Lab, where he's a lecturer, research associate, and manager of the MIT Transit Research Program, specializing in transport management and fare policies, among many other specialties. MIT and CTA partnered together on a transit fare pass study here in Chicago. I know I participated in that. It was a really compelling thing that Audrey was kind enough to share. I hope that all of you were able to contribute as well. And Michael and John are going to be sharing some of the insights and challenges and opportunities presented with that study in transit pass programs. We're also joined by Michael Hales from CA Ventures, an international real estate development firm working in the transit-oriented development field. And they're a developer, this is really interesting, who pays 100% of their employees' transit costs. And I thought my boss was going to be here today. He's not, but for those bosses out there, I hope you're listening, because that's a really appealing benefit. So, and I did ask Michael, he did say he's hiring. So, you know, if you're looking to make a leap, none of you guys in the front row, though, you're excluded, but Michael is hiring. So they've got some exciting developments going on, including international offices. So there's, you know, opportunity to ride the tube. So in Michael's role at CA Ventures, he oversees the company's infrastructure and operations, focusing on people and processes. And today he's going to speak to the thought process of businesses and how and why they choose to support sustainable commutes. And our last panelist is Mike Walczak, joining us from the Transportation Management Association of Lake Cook, where he serves as the executive director. And the TMA of Lake Cook has been active in the region since 1989, helping to improve employees' commutes, particularly the reverse commutes out from Metra out to the northern suburbs. And Mike is going to represent that public-private partnership, I'm going to say. You can better define that for me. But share their experiences with the TMA, how it works and why it's been successful, and how we can improve access to jobs and green commutes. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Audrey, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, Sarah. As Sarah mentioned, I'm Audrey Wennick. I'm the Director of Transportation here at the Metropolitan Planning Council. For those of you who may not have visited us before, MPC is an independent planning and policy organization that works to make the region more equitable, sustainable, and prosperous. And today's discussion is really occurring at the intersection of those 3 values. But first, I want to go over a few logistics. We're first going to hear from our speakers. give brief presentations. Then I'll ask the panel some questions, and then we will be taking Q&A from the audience. So you have index cards on your chairs. So as you think of questions, feel free to fill those out and pass them to the side to be collected. If anyone should need an accessible restroom, please do go to the front desk and they can direct you. And then I ask you to please silence your cell phones right now. We're so excited to have this discussion today because there is a real opportunity to partner even more with the business community on transportation. As we heard in our Transit Means Business report, if you haven't seen it, it's online, check it out. A number of businesses have recognized how important transit access is to their businesses and their talent. Their talent wants transit. But we have a lot more work to do. Right now, 29% of all greenhouse gases emitted come from the transportation sector. Of that, 60% is from light-duty vehicles, so from personal cars. And nearly 70% of commuters in the greater Chicago area drive to work alone. And that is a worse statistic than a lot of other regions, big city regions. For residents of the city of Chicago, 28% of people commute by transit and 49% drive alone by car, even just in the city. And that is a worse statistic than cities like Boston, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C., where a higher percentage of residents use transit and fewer people drive to work. At the same time, a Crain's real estate story this week notes that there are slowing sales of homes far away from jobs, and there's a pronounced preference for shorter commutes using transit as possible. So to stay competitive, this region really needs to make it both possible and attractive for employees to use sustainable modes of transportation, transit, biking, and walking. But the conditions need to be there for this to happen. This means that employers need to be located near transit in walkable areas or have solutions for the last mile. Employers need to start to view the commute as part of work, part of talent attraction and retention, part of the corporate sustainability policies, and an important contribution to the environmental quality in the regions where they're located. We need to do a better job of offering a toolbox for employers to make it easy for them to offer discounted transit passes and other incentives for sustainable transportation, and we're excited to hear about some new CTA work in this area. And we need to continue to work on funding and sustaining the transit system that we have. As many of you know, today is the last day of legislative session, and we are all crossing our fingers that there will be a capital bill passed by midnight that includes funding for transit. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton to President Carter from the CTA to present a bit about the CTA vision of how our region can move forward in this respect.
Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Audrey. Before I even get into my remarks, I want to take a moment just to thank Audrey and the MPC group for all the work that they've been doing really in supporting public transit in this region. They have a number of studies that they have put out that I think have really made the case for why investing in public transit is so important to a city like Chicago, and we've certainly enjoyed being their partner on any number of projects and activities as we move forward to press for improvement in public transportation throughout the city. So I appreciate the work that you guys are doing and continue to do on our behalf. I want to start off here with, I think, sort of laying the foundation for what you're going to be hearing from everyone else on the panel as sort of the big animal in the room, so to speak, and sort of give you a sense from my perspective of what it is that we're trying to do and how we think that ultimately feeds into the work that you're going to hear about from the other three panelists, and hopefully things that we will be doing in the future that are going to align with the desire to bring businesses, I think, more actively engaged in public transportation opportunities, and as a result of that, really starting to support the sustainability efforts that the city as a whole is undertaking to support the city. For those of you not familiar with CTA, we serve about 1.5 million people every day. That includes CTA buses, that includes our trains, and basically we are pretty much the backbone of the entire region. About 80% of all the rides provided within the region come from CTA. The remainder come from our partners at Metro and Pace. Commuting to work by public transit has grown for the past 10 years. Between 2011 and 2016, transit commutes for those ages 25 to 44, nearly half of all workers, grew 8%. Even those aged 55 and over, the fastest growing part of the workforce, saw a spike of 12% in choosing transit. So while we talk a lot about the decline in ridership, during the peak of the peak, we actually have been holding our own recently, and prior to recently, that is the area where we were seeing tremendous growth in our overall service. And so we know as a fact that for people who want to get to and from work, public transit is an option that they want to pursue and want to be able to have more opportunities to engage in. It is also one of the reasons, that we have had such a high degree of economic success in the city, as mentioned by the report that Audrey mentioned just a second ago by MPC. Each day, however, we are basically, seeing the impact of clogged automobile traffic and the impact of single-person trips on our city. We see it in the way in which our cars, trucks, and thousands of other vehicles move throughout the city. We see it in the way that they idle. We see it in how slowly they're able to get around, and we see it in the way that they're polluting the air that we all breathe. I believe that most people are aware of this issue, but I'd like to reduce would like to reduce the greenhouse gases their cars emit. But the truth is that first and foremost, they simply want to get to work. Public transit eases the traffic burden on the streets and the pollution in the air. As you may be aware, one CTA train can carry more than 600 people, and one CTA bus can carry the equivalent of 60 single-occupancy cars. There is no other mode of transportation that is offered that can do that. The ability to move large groups of people simultaneously is critical to facilitating the growth that keeps congestion under control and commuting time to a reasonable level, and it provides a sustainable framework for a truly livable city. Let me give you a real-world example of what I'm talking about. A simple inbound car trip from O'Hare to downtown during the morning rush hour commute can take anywhere from 60 minutes to 2 hours, leaving cars idling or moving slowly, emitting fumes and bumper-to-bumper traffic. That's bad for commuters, that's bad for employers, and that's bad for the environment. By contrast, the CTA Blue Line, which can carry 600 people per train, averages 45 minutes for that same rush hour trip. There is no ride-hailing service or car trip that will ever beat that reality. In fact, the newer transportation options, and even those still largely in development, do not offer up a high-capacity mobility solution to the issue of congestion. For example, one of the most important discussions in the transportation industry right now is about autonomous cars. The future and inevitability of the driverless car is generally seen as predestined. I doubt that anyone in this room would dispute the cool factor of an autonomous car. They're they're similar to something that you would see, for those of you old enough to remember this, the Jetsons. But I want to bring your attention to something that you may not have considered in that conversation, the time element. Consider this factoid from an industry professional. If all the workers at Willis Tower took autonomous vehicles to work, it would take 7 hours for all of them to arrive at that building. 7 hours. Imagine what you could do with all that productivity. There is simply, bottom line, no way downtown Chicago's congested street grid would be able to handle all of those vehicles. So to be clear, I am not against autonomous cars or any of the newer alternative forms of mobility. I do, however, believe that while a diverse transportation landscape is key to keeping a thriving metropolis like Chicago and its business community moving, public transit will be the most important part of that universe for us to be successful. A big part of Chicago's public transit's future success will be to get driving commuters to leave their cars at home and to utilize CTA buses and trains. I believe one of the most effective ways to do that is to incentivize their employers to develop programs that will entice their commuting employees to leave their cars behind and utilize public transit. We know that employees are interested in transit benefits, and we've seen success where companies have engaged in these new efforts. And we know for certain that urban communities like Chicago need a new paradigm against the ever-changing, see, this is what happens when you don't write your own lines. Against the ever-changing mobility landscape. I was recently a member of a group that was tasked with addressing that very issue. The new Transportation Mobility Task Force, which was convened in September of last year, was a group that was led by Chairman Ray LaHood, the former Secretary of the U.S. Department of Transportation, and included government agency heads, civic leaders, mobility industry leaders, and others. Our mandate was to examine, discuss, and make recommendations to address transportation challenges facing the city of Chicago. The task force final report, which was introduced last March, is a robust, forward-looking guiding document that was informed by discussions between the transportation and mobility industry's top experts and policymakers. If you have not read it, I would encourage you to do it. You can find it online, and I think you will find it is a thorough and fascinating report. For the purpose of our discussion today, perhaps the most important idea to come out of that group was to incentivize businesses to provide public transit benefits to employees. Many businesses in the downtown area offer parking incentives to their employees, which contributes to the high levels of single occupancy vehicles and congestion. Significantly, the report calls out the need to incentivize transit trips and multi-passenger rides while discouraging single occupancy and empty vehicle trips and trips that duplicate high-frequency public transit service. The report specifically discusses existing travel demand management programs which reduce low-occupancy vehicle trips. This strategy has worked in other cities by working directly with employers to align incentives for employee travel choices with citywide transportation policy goals. And that is why we have been working closely with MIT's Transit Lab to investigate the possibility of creating new fare bundles and different types of opportunities that we can provide to businesses and their employees. CTA and MIT have conducted initial research with employers and employees about their transit needs, their wants, and their preferences. Our partnership over the past few years has yielded invaluable information that we will now use to help guide us in the future. These are the first steps in our evolving plan to create a better work environment for the business community. And I think it's important to point out here that in my world, a lot of what we talk about is the product that we provide. And we talk about it in terms of the transportation services that we provide. But there's another product that we provide that we have not really leveraged as well as I think we should, and that's our fare media. And we have the opportunity to package and market that product in a way that I believe will be appealing to the business community, much more appealing than it is even today. Although I will say it is appealing today to many businesses. And I think through that process, we will have an opportunity to partner with the business community in a way that will start to improve the numbers that Audrey mentioned earlier in her remarks and in comparisons to Chicago, to Washington, D.C., Boston, and San Francisco. So before I close, I want to make this point. By asking businesses to support public transit, we are ultimately asking them to act in their own best interests and those of their employees. We already know, and I think you're going to hear from some of the other panelists, that the impact of public transportation spurs economic growth, which ultimately drives business success. And so it's in all of our best interests to find ways to partner and marry these various opportunities in a way that allow not only for our employers to continue to thrive and grow, but for our employees to find an environment that they operate in that is welcoming, sustainable, and livable, which I think is the goal for any major urban city today. Thank you.
Okay, now I'd like to invite John Antonucci from MIT up to the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dorval's a tough act to follow here. I don't have anybody writing mine, so I'm just going to talk. I come to you from a big academic research institution in Cambridge, Mass. Not the one named after the square, but the one that has a few more engineers. I want to just give you a few quick facts about MIT. There's about 11,000 faculty and staff serving about 11,000 students, of which about 4,500 are undergrads. A lot of graduate students, a lot of researchers. And it's a campus that sits on the Charles River, directly across the river from downtown Boston. On the eastern end, there's the Red Line, which is the heaviest transit line in Boston at Kendall Square, and then it kind of goes about a mile up the river, pretty far away from the Red Line. And so it's not the best served campus that you could see. But it's pretty well served. It's across the river from downtown. But like many older institutions that had a reasonable amount of land, like the institution up the river, they built a lot of parking in the past, and basically they gave employees free parking for a long, long time. In fact, there's still faculty members at MIT who think they have the right to free parking for life. But the campus has built and maintained over the years about 4,000 parking spaces, and that was when they had about 4,000 employees. But now we're up to about 11,000 employees, and the administrators and the faculty themselves have decided that they can't sustain this, and the main reason they can't sustain it is because the institution keeps growing. They keep putting buildings on the parking lots, and the only way they can replace those parking spaces, given regulations in the city of Cambridge, is they have to build down, and when they build down, they hit the river and the ocean, and basically the cost of those spaces is extraordinary, and they quickly figured out that transit is a better value. So what I'm going to talk about is a program that started a couple years ago that was spurred by folks, researchers in our group, and also by other faculty and staff throughout the Institute, saying there might be a better way, and there might be a better way to spend your resources, MIT, than to continue to replace these 4,000 parking spaces. So what they did was launch a whole new program. Now, they launched a program. They got rid of the free parking a long time ago, and they started increasing fees on parking. So at the time this program got started, people were paying about $1,500 a year for an annual parking permit. Now, that's not a lot. It's way less than, it's probably about $5, $6 a day. But when they started increasing the parking fees, they said, well, we're going to use the parking fees to help people take transit. And so they started introducing various transit subsidies. And so that worked for a while. And for over about 15 years, the parking prices went up about 10% a year, and the transit benefits got a little bit richer and a little bit richer, to the point where they were offering 50% subsidies on any transit pass for anybody that wanted it. And they were offering subsidies a lot larger for the parking when you take the full cost of parking into effect. But still, it was a success, because basically they were up to they were down to about 30% of the employees were driving alone through these things. But they hit a kind of a roadblock. It just flattened out. And the reason was there wasn't flexibility in the program. They didn't really think about people that could drive 1 or 2 days a week and take transit the other 3 days a week. And they said, we got to design a program that's more flexible. And so this is what I'm going to talk about very briefly, was this broader vision of a flexible program that's going to actually have results and move the needle with respect to people now choosing transit more often. Not necessarily full-time, but more often. And so it was branded Access MIT, and I'll tell you a little bit what the goals were, was to reduce the demand for the parking facilities. The last garage that was built at MIT was about 3 or 4 years ago, and the price per parking space was $100,000. The next garage that hasn't opened yet, but there's a major development in the Kendall Square area, and they took a whole lot of surface parking spaces away. They're up about $150,000 a space. And they started realizing we're just throwing this money away in a sense, because they can't charge enough to get that money back. And so they realized we could use these resources for other reasons. At the same time, sustainability and carbon emissions was a goal campus-wide. There were a lot of initiatives going on. They also have a lot more competition for research type staff, because Boston is booming. The biotech and high-tech industries are very, very competitive with respect to hiring high-level employees. And finally, they wanted to kind of help out the transit agency by testing some concepts that the transit agency had in mind of let's try this concept of a universal pass. That is, let's give a transit pass to everyone and make the cost a zero marginal cost for transit. And so that was the goal of all this. And they didn't want it to just be a nice thing to do. They wanted to actually get results. So they set a goal of 10% reduction in the parking spaces over the first 2 years. So what is this new package? What's the first one? The first one's there, okay. These first two things are the core of it. So the shift was everyone could get a free pass for buses and subways in Boston to use as much or as little as they wanted. And parking, instead of being an annual commitment that you kind of had a sunk cost and then it was free after that, went to a daily charge, so that the days you parked, you paid. And so the daily charge is now $10 a day, and transit is free. And the chip for the transit, to get into the transit system, is in the MIT ID. The only way they could really do this economically was not to buy monthly transit passes from the MBTA, the Transit Authority. So the negotiation with the Transit Authority was, we'll pay for every ride all of our employees take at full price. And the people who take more rides than a monthly pass will pay for those. People that take less will pay for those. But at least we're getting the value from every ride that's taken by our employees. By the way, they didn't mind that they took rides off-peak or going to a ball game and things like that. MIT saw that as their contribution to sustainability of the city. So there was a few other things. The commuter rail pass didn't have the same technology, and so there was the only way to use commuter rail on a regular basis in Boston is to buy a monthly pass, and it's a flash pass. So the chip in the card doesn't work on commuter rail. So for those users, they've increased the subsidy from 50% a month to 60% a month that went along with this program. They introduced a new parking subsidy at MBTA stations. A lot of the employees said, look, I would take the T, it's cheaper, but, the parking charge at MIT, and I add the fare, and, it's more than if I have to park for $7 a day or $8 a day at one of the transit stations. So a 50% subsidy for parking at the transit stations was introduced. And then a whole bunch of marketing and online gamification and reminders about commuting were introduced along with this program called Access MIT. The marketing, you can see some of it is here. It featured employees who willingly, with this program, changed their commute. This guy saves a lot of his time taking the red line now instead of driving in on the Southeast Expressway. So I don't want to talk too much about what they did, but I do want to talk a little bit about what happened. And so this was 3 years ago now, and we've collected a whole bunch of data, and we had surveys, and we have counts, and I'll just go very briefly through just to give you an idea. So before this all started, the breakdown in 2014, people were generally driving alone 30% of the time and taking transit 43% of the time. Walking and biking was about 19%, and shared ride was in there at about 8%, or I think that's what it says. The shift has been to transit and away from single occupant drivers. We took 1% out of the active mode, and the shift was almost immediate, although the number of parking transactions has gradually kept going down, so this kind of infrequent use of transit keeps going up. The transactions in the first year for parking went down 8%. The number of permits, you pay $10 a day, but you had to pay $100 a year to get a permit for the right to park for $10 a day. So that was a little bit of a disincentive, that it wasn't purely marginal. That drove the number of people who said, I don't need that permit anymore. And in the first year, it went down about 7 or 8% the number of permits sold. In the second year, it went down another 10% for a total increase of permit sales reduction in 2 years of 15%. I have this labeled as T-Pass usage, but really what this is usage of this free chip in the card. And 24% more of the staff, so from 2,400 to 3,000, use that card and use that chip at least 2 work days a week. And so that really is an increase compared to the regular users beforehand. And about 500 of the 11,000 staff are claiming the parking subsidy at the transit agencies. And this is one of the things that anecdotally people really, really love, because they just didn't think it was worth it to drive, park, get on transit, and come when the cost was close. But when they saved enough, this made a big difference. So my final slide is just summing this up. What has happened with this? Well, it quickly achieved its goals. They've saved the replacement of 400 parking spaces at today's cost of about $150,000 a space. It showed that behavioral change was possible with the right incentives, kind of a combination of a carrot and a stick, in the sense of but mostly carrot, because when you didn't park, you didn't pay, and that was really a key thing to this. The employees like the flexibility. They love the flexibility. So even the ones that don't take transit at all kind of say, every once in a while I can, or even they've said, when I go to the ball game now, I don't have to pay. And the big thing is the MBTA, after looking at the results of this was good for the MBTA as well. They're getting about 5% more revenue and 10% more rides out of the MIT community from the beginning of this to the end. So that overall, it's a win for employees, it's a win for the MBTA, and it's a win for MIT. And so it's something that I think The MBTA thinks this was so good that they are now figuring out the parameters to expand this region-wide and have it part of their corporate press offering. So if a company wants to go universal and wants to provide some type of subsidy, they'll be able to do the exact same thing. So, thank you.
Now I'd like to invite Michael Hales from CA Ventures up. If you want to bring your own mic, okay.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here today. Excited to share with this group what it is that we're doing at CA Ventures related to transit and potentially be a role model for others, or at least just explain what's going on in our company today. So before I get started, Sarah gave you a little bit of the background, but CA Ventures is actually a global real estate investment management company that is based out of Chicago, Illinois. We own or operate $9 billion of assets across the globe, primarily here in the US, but also in South America and in Europe. Right now we have 1,300 employees in 5 offices around the globe, and we have 250 employees that are based here with our corporate headquarters. And for CA, the reality is that transit is really at the core of what we do. It's part of our DNA at the end of the day. And it comes in 2 formats, right? First of all, it's a valuable benefit for our employees at the end of the day, and that's because we pay for it. It's also a key determinant in our decision to select sites for some of our development. We see some of these patterns that are going on, and we understand the impact that being close to transit can have for employees as they're making decisions about where to live, where to spend their money, and how to commute to work at the end of the day. We believe that this access for CA to talent, to customers at the end of the day, to live in our building, or to community, is really a key differentiator for our success as we continue to grow throughout the world. So I'm going to show you a little bit about both. Right? So the first is just, what is our benefit? What the heck are we doing at the end of the day? And what are we seeing as a result of that? So on the left-hand side, you have our benefit summary at a glance. And these are the transit benefits that we are putting in place today. These are focused on our corporate employees in Chicago, right? But whether you're riding the CTA, whether you're riding Metro, whether you're using PACE, whether you're using Divvy to get the last mile from, say, the Metro station all the way to your office, we cover that, right? That's 100% covered by CA. We also understand some of the things that John was talking about. And while we're not advocating or necessarily saying that we want people to drive at the end of the day, we did set up a parking FSA so that if folks wanted to drive, or realistically wanted to drive to their transit station and park, then that is a benefit that we're also covering up for our employees. The results is something that we're really proud of and I think speak for themselves. 95% of our corporate workforce uses this benefit, right, in some format or the other. They're either using the CTA via Ventra, or they're using the Metro to get into work, or they're using Divvy to get around the city. I think another piece that speaks here is that 33% of our workforce is actually commuting in from the suburbs. And when you think about this, and I myself am one of those candidates, but living out in the suburbs and having to make that shift from Chicago out there to raise the family and get back in, taking the Metro is a little bit of a different story. It takes me an hour to get in every day, right? But I think it allows us access to talent that we wouldn't have otherwise. And 99% of our workforce actually cite this as a deciding factor when choosing CA as a place to work. And I think the biggest thing that we can take away from this is what I have at the bottom line here. For the first time ever, CA was voted as a Crane's best place to work in 2019 in the city of Chicago. And this is, I think this is one of the factors, among many, but that shows that this is really valued by our employees. In terms of how we're doing this in our day-to-day decision-making around what we're actually doing as a company and driving success for where we go, we have what's called the transit-oriented development strategy at the end of the day. And we do this across the country. And what I mean by that is that CA prioritizes sites where transit is a key portion of the development projects that we're doing. 85% of our existing portfolio and future development sites are within 3 blocks of public transit rail systems. And I'm speaking primarily to our multifamily asset class at the end of the day, because we do have others. But that's a big number, right? And that is a very close proximity for folks to be able to get into their job at the end of the day or to their community. Within Chicago specifically, we actually have $1 billion of investments, all of which are adjacent to or within 2 to 3 blocks of a train ride. Right? One interesting fact about this is when we think about our buildings and the parking ratios that we're putting into our buildings, right? We are working today in a range of about 0.3 to 0.75 parking ratio. What I mean by that, per unit, right? The typical product that you would see in the market would be 1 to 1.5, so basically a parking spot for every unit, or maybe 1.5 parking spots per unit. But because of our proximity to train stations, or because of our proximity to public transportation, we're operating at a lower number than that. And we work with the city or any municipality when we get those passed, because they see the benefit as well. And I'm going to tell you the rationale, I mean, while it may seem straightforward, it's really 3 things that we focus on, right? One is the availability of transit from home to work, makes our building more desirable to potential renters, right? So this does have a money-making piece to it at the end of the day, but it helps us to get consumers when they have choices to make in the marketplace. From a renter perspective, honestly, this gives them the ability to save money, right? You can be without a car. You don't have to have the car. You don't have to have the insurance. You don't have to pay for that parking that you otherwise would, which can result in a couple of different things, but one might be to pay higher rent. One might be to live in a different building than you otherwise would because you have more disposable income. And these factors together have resulted in fast lease-ups, or faster lease-ups in the market for CA products than we've seen in our peers. And I have the example at the bottom of the page here, but we had a building that we just developed at 1140 South Wabash here in Chicago. And we actually leased that building up in 6 months. And when we opened the doors, we were 50% already pre-leased before we even opened the doors for residents to be able to move in. And I think a big factor of that is the location that it has, the type of building that we were offering, the way that we're speaking to new consumers in the marketplace, and they see the benefit of transit being one of those big movers at the end of the day. So I kept it short, honestly. I just wanted to share a little bit about what was going on. But in closing, it's just going back to the beginning, because this really is a very simple story for us at the end of the day. It is a central part of our fabric and the DNA for CA Ventures. We do have 250 employees today, but the reality is we've been doing this since the day we opened our doors and had 5 employees back in 2004. Right? So this has been a part of who we wanted to be at the end of the day. It is an amazing benefit for our people. It's a talent attraction tool. It's a talent retention tool for CA. And I think this is really the #1 reason that we wanted to do this, right? And when you think about the costs that are associated with whether or not to pay for this for employees, we see it just pay for itself at the end of the day by the type of talent that we're getting, by the fact that your employees is just one less thing that they have to worry about is something that we really believe in. And I think our turnover rate because of this is also very low at CA. And it's a priority for us, site selection, customer engagement in our properties across the country. So it is helping to translate from what we do not only in the fabric and our DNA for our people, but also into how we actually do business in the cities in which we operate. So thank you all. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you. And now, Mike Walzak, please come up and join us, and we'll have our last presentation, and we'll get into some discussion.
Thanks, Audrey, and good afternoon. I want to transport you all about 20, 25 miles or so from here out to the world of the suburbs and discuss what the TMA is doing, our work with the businesses in the Lake Cook corridor, and what some of the challenges that we're facing are. So first thing about TMAs, there's only 2 currently in the Chicago area. The other one's out in Hoffman Estates at the Prairie Stone development, and as well as the TMA Lake Cook. About 140 or so across the United States, mostly on the coast, about a third of them on the West Coast, a good chunk on the East Coast as well. Various reasons for that, but certain states, certain regions have requirements on the establishment of TMAs. The overall goal of them is obviously to facilitate public-private partnerships, improve mobility for employees, and given that there are some requirements, some of them are mandatory, ours and a lot of other ones are voluntary organizations. So TMA of Lake Cook, I think it was mentioned earlier, is about 30 years old, founded in 1989. The mission is to improve employees' commute to work in Cook and Lake counties. We currently have about 40 member businesses, as well as municipal members and nonprofits and transit agencies as well. The goal is to advocate for transit and highway service improvements. The map on the right there shows where our members are located, largely along the Lake Lake Cook corridor, the tri-state, and then kind of along the north central service line as well. You can see on this slide and another one later where the metro stations are that are served by the Shuttlebug program that I will get into. So who are our members? Everyone from some developers that have joined together with their employers, but we also feature a number of the kind of the bigger names in the Chicago corporate scene, including these listed here. So the bread and butter of what we do is the Shuttlebug program and solving that last mile for reverse commuters and also from suburban to suburban commuters who want to have a transit option in the suburbs but live elsewhere and where it's not necessarily right on the train line. The Shuttlebug program that we operate with PACE and Metra is 13 routes. We service out of 6 Metro stations and 1 CTA station to about 4 large employment centers, obviously focused on the last mile and reverse commute. We're still around about 1,000 daily passenger trips, taking those off of the area expressways. The current situation that we have with PACE and Metra was set up in 1996, a little bit after the original founding of the TMA. And the partnership cost, and this is getting into the public-private partnership aspect of it, is a 50-50 split. So Metra and PACE come with their 50% each year, and then the individual employers, depending on kind of the size of the corporation, as well as what their quarterly ridership is, pay the remaining 50%. A few routes have different funding frameworks, but that's largely the formula that we use. And on the right, you can see the route structure that we currently have. The North Union Pacific North Line, the Braeside station is used. There's a couple of 3 stations actually on the Milwaukee North. The largest one being the Lake Cook Road station, and then also one line comes out of Des Plaines on the Union Pacific Northwest. So a little bit of the history on this. It was started, a pilot project in 1994 as in anticipation of the opening of the Lake Cook Road station, which was originally going to be kind of a new inline station that was going to take pressure off of the Deerfield Metro Station, Northbrook, and Glenview a little farther south. It started out with just 6 vans through a CMAQ federal grant, and has grown from there up to 26 buses that PACE owns and operates, and continued to, one of the nice things about having a bus network is having the flexibility. So we meet with the companies, meet with PACE on a yearly basis, and are able to adjust routes as as corporate moves are made, as employees move around various corporate campuses, as train schedules change. We reassess those on a yearly basis. Sometimes we even change them in the middle of the year as well. So who's riding the service? We have about 62% is a reverse commute, largely out of Union Station, Ogilvie, and then some of the near in Ravenswood, Clybourne, and Western Avenue coming out from the city of Chicago. And this has been mentioned other places, but this really speaks to growing the potential employer base. And this is something that our members, they sell to their new employees, they sell to their existing employees, is, the service is here, and they, we'd like you to take advantage of that. The remaining riders do come largely from the north, from Lake County communities that are near the metro stations, and a good number of riders come from Wisconsin and park at the end of the lines and come down as well to save that drive on the tri-state. Participation levels for employers is about 2.5 to 10%. The reasons for those employees whose businesses are served but they do not participate is largely revolves around the schedule. You know, the work schedule isn't conducive to the shuttle schedule, or the personal schedules having to get out at a different time. Something we like to see is only about 10 to 11% prefer to drive. So we know there's a potential market out there for more transit riders. And then the last bullet point I think is also very important, is that 22% of the riders do not have access to, either do not have a car or do not have access to a car for their daily commute. So it speaks to the necessity of a service like this. So why has the program been successful to date? We do have a core of 2 to 4 employers, Discover, Allstate, Baxter, who provide a good chunk of our ridership. So having those large employers, consistently large employee base has helped tremendously. Having a long commute, over 20 miles, having that option to hop on a train instead of sitting on the Tri-State or on the Edens every day. A lot of the employees do live proximate to a metro station as well. There's, a 2-seat ride is manageable for a lot of the riders. A 3-seat ride where they might have to get transit to the metro station, then the metro, and then our service. It might be a ride too far. The frequency of metro service is also great. On those 3 lines that I mentioned, they do have a good amount of reverse commute in the morning and the afternoon. We average about 3 to 5 different shuttle opportunities on each line, on each route per day. So it's not just one and you miss it. You do have an opportunity to take multiple shuttles from the train to your place of employment and vice versa. There was a few shuttles that had served the North Central service line. Unfortunately, the frequency on that line wasn't conducive to the shuttle schedule, and those services were dropped. Mentioned this earlier, and some of the other speakers did too, but the financial support that the employers give, and they see the value in the program, that they keep on contributing to it and selling it to their employees, is another reason for a successful program. And finally, the partnership that we have with PACE and Metro, both on obviously on a funding standpoint, and then just the publicity that they can give us to launch it to a wider ridership is invaluable. Just talk a little bit about how it works. If a employee is at a participating company, they are eligible to have a Ventra card, and it looks, I should have brought one with me, it looks a little different than a normal Ventra card. It's blue, and it's only good on rides on these shuttles. So you can't take it, and unlike the MIT, you can't just take it around the town. But it is, all of them are subsidized and cost-free to the employees. The Metro ride is the employee's responsibility, but like some of the other employers, a lot of ours do offer transit benefits. Some of the other things that we do at the TMA, have an annual construction meeting, typically in March or April, lay out the construction projects that will impact the employers throughout the year, an annual meeting and a fall meeting. Do a lot of promotion events as well at our members to promote our work, and especially the Shuttlebug program. So what are the challenges that we have faced or are facing right now? Vehicle availability and capacity is a large one. PACE just doesn't have enough vehicles to always come up with the demand for either a new route, an expanded route, or, as the second bullet point lists, a larger vehicle at some point. So kind of constrained with the availability of vehicles. private carriers also operate in the same realm. We do have 40-plus members in the TMA, but not all of those use the shuttle bus program. A number of them do have private carriers that serve them. There's typically run more expensive, but there's more flexibility, a little more autonomy with the private carrier. So we kind of work on a as-needed basis with those. One of the big ones is corporate relocations and just the changing work environment from the time the TMA was founded until now. The large corporate campuses in the suburbs are always changing. We've seen a number of our members who have moved, not so much wholesale to the Loop or downtown Chicago, but have started to move some of their employees down here, given the benefits that they see of having transit available in the Loop and the workforce down here. There's also the changing flexibility of people's work schedules, either not going into the office every day, working remotely, hoteling, that sort of thing. And then there's always the move out of the Chicago region as well. We are losing one of our larger employers kind of over the course of this year, moving to the Boston area. Thanks, John. So good luck with them. But it's kind of a two-sided coin. We are losing a larger participant in our program, but that corporate campus is going to be available either for redevelopment or for new employers coming in. And I know that Lake County Partners, who we work with, and the Deerfield Chamber of Commerce and other chambers do sell this as a real strength in selling the corporate campuses. So a few other challenges, just the ongoing funding challenges with our agency, with our members, and our partner agencies. Low gas prices, there is a relationship between shuttle ridership and low gas prices, unfortunately. And then the changing transportation scene with TNCs. We have begun to partner, to talk with them about opportunities. There's a pilot that's been launched with the RTA and Bannockburn Lakes, which is a suburban development that was not served by the shuttle program, where Lyft is providing rides to the employees. It's been subsidized by RTA and the development to a number of metro stations, looking to see if it will work on a more small scale than could be served by a shuttle. And so we're looking to, how can we use these partnerships to better to provide better commutes for the employees. So that's the presentation. Look forward to the Q&A.
Thanks, everyone. I think that was a really well-rounded perspective from the transit perspective, some different incentive packages from the employer perspective, both the urban and the suburban last mile perspective. Now, just want to have a little bit of a conversation in terms of, I wanted to ask, Mike, since we just heard your presentation, as you noted, there is only kind of one big TMA in the Chicago region, and there's the second smaller one, and they're very prevalent on the coasts. What do you think we could do in Chicago to spur more types of partnerships and partnership associations like yours throughout the region?
I think looking at opportunities where they exist that kind of like the setup that we have, where there is accessible transit nearby, and then having the large corporate campuses and trying to identify where those potential partnerships could be located. As I mentioned in our presentation, and it's kind of been an ongoing thing, is we did get grant funding to originally start up the TMA as well. Have done some programs throughout the years using grant funding. So looking at federal or state grants to identify, kind of get that seed money in there to help make a case for that need or for that opportunity.
Great. And it was useful for President Carter to show the report that came out, the mobility report that sort of sets us on a path forward potentially in this region of some new innovative strategies. One thing that was in the Mayor Lightfoot's transition report was even bolder than that, was potentially passing a commute trip reduction ordinance like has been pioneered in Seattle. And I'm just interested to hear, maybe Michael Hales as a corporate partner that would be subject to something like this. These types of ordinances require companies to develop plans to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips and then do surveys and monitor their progress check the outcome. So what is your take as a business in Chicago of policies like this?
Well, from CA's perspective, I don't want to come out for or against anything that may come out there, but from my own personal experience, I think that the reality is people and companies are smart. They're going to react to what is in their best interest at the end of the day. I would say that any program that's rolled out, whether it's an employer rolling out a program for its employee base, whether it's a city rolling out a program for the constituents of its town or the employees that work in their town, I would say incentive packages and putting things in place to change the behavior, to get to the place that you want to be at the end of the day is going to have to be forefront at any of that. I think Dorval mentioned that actually in his speech as well. So I would certainly be interested to see more about it, but I think as long as there is the right incentives to push people to react in the way that you want them to, that's what will start to move the needle.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if anyone else on the panel has any other thoughts about that. Yeah.
Well, I don't get the luxury of saying whether I support or don't support a mayor's initiative, so obviously I support it. But no, I think to Mike's point, and to some degree that was part of what I was commenting on as well, is that in order to start really moving the needle in some significant way, it's probably going to require a combination of both broader city policies or county policies in combination with efforts by transit agencies like CTA to develop products that ultimately appeal to the business community in a way that helps them sort of meet the obligations that may be placed on them. So I kind of view the conversation as a carrot and a stick approach. I think there are ways to avoid the stick if you're willing to take the carrot, but I have to produce the carrot that will help you avoid the stick. So it does become a partnership conversation, but I think that's one of the reasons why the surveys that we have done and the information we gather is going to be so helpful in that dialogue, because I think we're getting a better sense now what type of products would appeal to companies, and then ultimately figure out how to get them to accept and integrate that into their employee benefit programs, which is where the stick may be a little helpful.
Excellent. Do you think, John, you gave a lot of, John Atnucci, you gave a lot of detail about the MIT experience and how it really was a process. It was an evolution over many, many years, and it was hard to get your institution to that point. What do you think was maybe the biggest element of getting decision makers at MIT to get it in terms of turning the corner and establishing that type of policy?
Well, I did already mention the cost of replacing parking, which I can't deny. That was a big thing. But early on in the process, when we started thinking about these, we did a bunch of focus groups with employees, and there must have been 300 to 400 employees in a series of focus groups. And I think the administration and the top people at MIT's eyes were just wide open at hearing some of the reaction. And actually, the employees who drove were also amazed when they were given the facts about the subsidies that already existed for driving and for public transit at the company. So I think the transparency of what the employer is actually doing right now and a discussion among employees brings out to the management what's most important to their employees. And I think, as Mike says, the key to this is most employers want to have happy employees. And this is a bigger issue than most management people think. And I think that's the key to moving people. And I think that the public and private sector, through some of these initiatives, and even this kind of forum, can get that word out there, and we got to get that word out there more. But if you talk to your employees about what's worse, the worst thing about their day, a lot of times it's their commute. And it's not just the people that are taking transit who complain, but it's the people who drive. So.
Great point, great point. In Chicago, both RTA and CTA have pre-tax transit benefits programs. They do work with some smaller employers. The large employers like WageWorks work directly with the benefits staff at companies, but both RTA and CTA have these programs for just pre-tax benefits, not even incentives. However, in this region, anecdotally, we hear there's lower uptake than there really could be on these programs. Do you think, I guess, President Carter, why do you think that is? How do you think we could improve the uptake? And do you think we should try to combine these, or how can we package them and make them more attractive?
Well, I think the challenge that we're facing right now is that while we both offer transit benefit programs, we're basically offering to the employers the exact same thing that the public can get on any given day. And as you've heard, I think, from Mike and Mike, the employers have different needs and different expectations for what their commuting support is going to be based on their employees. And what I think the future is for really driving an increase in participation in the program really is a combination of providing employers with products that their employees want, and two, getting employers enthusiastically engaged in the benefits that come out of offering these types of benefits up to their employees. I mean, I think, you mentioned Washington, D.C., Boston, and San Francisco as examples of where you think where there is a higher transit benefit usage. I can't really speak to Boston, maybe John can, and I don't know that much about San Francisco. I do know a little bit about D.C. And the reason that the program is so successful in D.C. is that the biggest employer, the federal government, not only advocates for employees to sign for transit benefit programs, are constantly pursuing ways to ultimately encourage that use. And if we had the same type of energy with the business community here in Chicago, I think that we would see a similar type of engagement. I think that there's a lot of opportunities, and I think you even heard some of it in the other panels, about ways in which Metro and CTA can join forces to provide possibly some sort of product that would be unique to the benefit program that could support the commuter needs of each of those employees. I think there are opportunities to do combination packages similar to what Mike is doing at their company, at his company, that offers up a combination of ride hailing, bike sharing, and transit. One of the things that we have seen from the survey that we've done is that there is a very unique interest in having multiple options around how you can move around the city. And I think figuring out packages that can support multiple options will ultimately be something that will be very appealing to the business community itself. So one of the benefits of having our own program is that I can then focus unique products that basically get supported from my program. So I don't view both programs as necessarily being in conflict with each other. I think the programs allow us to be much more customized, and I think in the long run will end up resulting in us having much higher participation throughout the region.
Great, thanks. This is an interesting question, sort of, again, thinking along the lines of incentives. The city and public agencies in the counties have DBE requirements for a lot of their contracts. What do you think of a concept of integrating transit participation requirements into the contractual and procurement process? Not necessarily like ridership percentages, but have that be a component of contracting.
Is that directed to me?
I guess it is.
Well, you know, it is an interesting concept, one I hadn't really thought of that much until you just mentioned it, but we leverage public dollars to pursue a number of good policy objectives. It is not an unusual action for government to engage in. Obviously, you need to weigh that against the cost of what that provision may require, but I think that, you know, anything that encourages support for good public policy is something that's a tool that's worth looking at. Without really thinking through, off the top of my head, the complexities of the details of what we're talking about, I don't think it's a crazy idea. And I think it's one that's worth at least understanding, and how that may ultimately leverage public agencies' purchasing power to support good public policy.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I know, John, you work at the MIT Transit Lab on knowing what's going on around the country. Are there other types of incentives that, you know, you think are the things that we should think about here in Chicago?
I think to talk a little bit about the difference between transit benefits here and transit benefits in Boston, just as an example. Mm-hmm. There's a much longer and stronger history of corporate transit benefits in Boston. And I think that the only thing I can point to on that is large company leadership early on. So that in, I think, 1975, during the energy crisis, John Hancock Insurance, who had like 5,000 employees in the Back Bay, came out and said, we're going to subsidize transit. And all of a sudden, all the other companies started doing it. Now, you guys have done it, but you only have 250 employees. Not enough yet. What I think Chicago needs is a couple real big corporate folks to come out there and say, I want to be a leader, you should join me, and it catches. I mean, this caught on like wildfire in the 70s, and we don't have the energy crisis per se, but we have the congestion crisis now, and I think that if somehow there could be a corporate move between the public sector and the private sector, and maybe with a little bit of regulation, but I don't think regulation in itself is going to do it. We got to get some of the big companies to get out there. MIT is only spending $100 more per employee for this wonderful free program than they were spending before. Now, sure, they were subsidizing regular transit users before at 50%, but $100 per employee, it's peanuts, okay? And it makes a big difference. So does anybody know any big employers? This guy's ready to talk to.
That's a great point. That's an impressive statistic. Only $100 more to give everybody on your campus free transit anytime, anywhere. Yeah, that's amazing.
It is amazing. I mean,
in this era of tight job market, you would think that would be a benefit that people would find, absolutely critical to distinguish themselves, which I guess CA Ventures has identified. So to Michael, regarding your developments near transit, do you feel you are required to build more parking than you would like? at all? Are there any ordinances that are forcing you to build? Would you like to be building zero parking, or do you feel like you have the flexibility?
No, I think we would certainly like to build to the demands of what our consumers are going to need. That's the real answer. We never want to have a building where we don't have enough parking and our consumers are forced to go somewhere else. But on the other hand, to have too much parking that is sitting empty doesn't help anybody either. And so our biggest goal is to work with the cities to show them, everybody's got an idea of what they want. Usually from the city's perspective, they're just trying to ensure that the people that are going to be living there also have the availability of needs that they have. And so it's coming out and showing the benefits of, hey, we're this close to transit. This is what we see. Look at our other places. This is the real ratio. And we do a lot of studies on that at the end of the day to ensure that we're getting to the right number. So I would say it's both sides. We don't want too little, but we don't want too much. And we want to use the space and use the land and use the areas in the city to the best of its full potential. And if we can make space for other things, for more units in our building or for retail in the building or for whatever it might be, that can be even better for everyone involved.
Great. What about having this process driven by the employees? So if the employer is not recognize it, but the employees want it, what do you feel are resources out there for employees to try to convince their employers to do this? I don't know if, Mike Waldeck, you have any experience from the TMA working with your partners, seeing employee-generated interest resulting in a company becoming part of your group?
I think that does happen on occasion. One of the more recent examples of that, it came from both kind of the relocation process and then as well as the employees was Caterpillar when they relocated their corporate offices to the Chicago area. The location that they found they don't need to participate in the shuttle program because they are within walking distance of the Lake Cook Road metro station. And that was a big incentive for their corporate leadership and for their employees that were relocating here, was to have that option. So I think that's potentially one example, one recent example. I do deal, not on a daily basis, but hearing from the employer base of our existing membership, and they're never afraid, and it's a good thing, they're never afraid to give their feedback on what's working, what's not working. And so it all goes into to our analysis process of what the current routes are and where we can improve service. It comes down to the end of the day, if it's not fitting the employees, then why would the employers be putting their capital into this program? So we have to be sensitive to that.
I think that's a very interesting question, and I know that we have done some survey work where we have really put the question to our customers about, are you aware of whether your employer even has a transit benefit program? In many cases, they don't even know, much less that they should take advantage of it. So I think there's an education component to this discussion that is as much on the transit agencies as it is anyone else, which is to better educate our customer base about what this benefit can provide and to really put them in a position to advocate for or to check on whether or not their employer provides it. I think John made the point just a minute ago is that most employers want their employees to be happy. And one of the biggest frustrations that employees talk about is their commute time. And so, if as a business decision, if your employees are telling you that they want this kind of a benefit and you're not offering it, it's just like any other kind of benefit. The employer at least starts to look at it and say, is this something we should be offering up? Then CTA comes walking in and says, not only can we offer you that benefit, but we can create a customized, tailored program for your employees that will ultimately provide the most efficient way for you to spend for that benefit and give your employees what they want. What in that isn't a win-win solution for everybody? And I think that's the path that we're headed down. And I think that's the direction that we want to see the city go into as they try to support these types of activities.
John?
Going back to the question about regulation versus incentives, I think there is one regulation that the cities ought to be thinking about, and I think it was in some of the mobility reports, but I'm not sure. And that's the concept of if employers are providing free or heavily subsidized parking, they should be providing the exact same benefit to every other employee, the concept of what they call parking cash out. And there are cities, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, some in the L.A. area, that are passing these ordinances that says if you're over 250 employees and you provide free parking, you either have to get rid of the free parking or you have to give the same benefit to everyone else. And that will have a dramatic effect on the mode split in this region if that happens. Because, you know, these guys did it. They gave almost an equal, I'm not sure. I don't know how much this parking cost is but if you do that, people will take the savings they get from parking and put it in their pocket or spend it on something else and take transit.
That's a great point. I'm so glad you brought that up. Just one little technical question for Michael Hales. The subsidy benefit that you provide, does that get taxed as almost like salaries do? You know, how does that work in terms of you providing a benefit and it being taxed for the employee?
Yeah.
Since you're the COO, I thought you might know.
The reality is that we have a partnership with Ventra where we pay that on behalf of the employee. So I think that is already taken into account.
Okay.
And then, pre-tax. And then the Metra side is slightly different. It is more of a corporate expense that is the way that we treat it at the end of the day. So an expense for the company that we're just absorbing at the end of the day versus having it as a tax for our employees.
Great. With CPS, our Chicago Public School System, as one of Chicago's largest employers and users of transit, has there been any conversation with CTA in terms of trying to give even further subsidies or free fares to staff and or students? These are from the audience.
You know, there's always been a lot of discussion about what sort of additional transit options we can offer up to students and faculty. I think the basic principle to keep in mind here is that free rides aren't free. And the real question that needs to be asked in this region is what level of subsidy do you want to give to public transit? And if you give an adequate level of subsidy, which I would point out isn't happening right now, although with the capital bill, if hopefully it goes through, that will help a lot. But if you're willing to subsidize the operating costs at a level that will ultimately support those types of services, then I certainly understand and agree with the equity and other issues that it would address. Access to transportation is an equalizer for so many other things that we deal with in the city. And being in a position to provide that access, I think, is a key to addressing a lot of the other economic challenges that exist within the city. Figuring out how to pay for it, that's the challenge.
Right. So these are public policy decisions, but they have price tags.
Absolutely. Yes. And they're public policy decisions that I'm glad to embrace and encourage. You know, as a philosophical matter, I certainly understand and agree with the concepts and principles behind them. I just have to figure out a way to pay for them. And I need those same policy makers to look at that side of it at the same time.
Right. Well, we're just about out of time, and we are just 12 hours away from knowing whether there might be a Capitol bill. If we're all going to stay up till midnight tonight, it might be that late. But I'm just going to throw up, just remind you that we have some other events coming up here at MPC. I'm not going to read them all, but we do a lot of events, not only lunchtime roundtables, but also think and drinks and evening events out in the field. We have an event on the future of affordable housing on June 12th. investment in people to end poverty, June 19th, and a number of other events. So please do take a look at our website and come join us in the future for another public policy discussion like this one. And I wish to thank all of our panelists who have put in a lot of effort to their presentations and thought to answering questions on the fly here. So thank you so much for being part of this conversation. It's been great.